Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today we have a special treat and we are preparing for the big NABCEP Conference in Reno, and we are talking to an actual person in Reno. Well, we might all be in Reno by the time this podcast is released. And this is Eric Haskell. Eric is the founder and CEO of Sagebrush Energy. So, hey, welcome to the show, Eric. And is there a lot of sagebrush around you right now?
There is actually. Great to be here, Sean. Thank you. Yeah, in Reno, there is a ton of sagebrush, which is obviously the inspiration for the name of our company. We're surrounded by it.
Yeah, I was just in Arizona not too long ago, a few days ago, visiting my daughter, and there was sagebrush in her yard, and I was like, hey, can we just throw it over the fence? And she was like, no, we better just take it to the dumpster or to the garbage can because the neighbors might not like that. But
Well, we're having a terrible windstorm here in Reno right now. So I think a lot of those tumbleweeds that I see rolling by are actually sagebrush at one point.
yeah, it must be good for the wind energy. So hopefully during the NABCEP conference, it's maybe not blowing as hard. Some of the hardest winds I ever saw was kind of near you in the Carson Valley. I was at Wally's Hot Springs 10 years ago. And it just took off like crazy. It knocked things over. It was like I couldn't drive,
Yeah, no, it's a very windy place. A lot of people don't think of Reno, but it's one of the windiest cities in the country. And as we're coming up on spring, these months of sort of April, May tend to be the windiest times.
Okay, great. So at the NABCEP conference, what do you think? How windy is it going to get? We'll mostly be indoors, I guess.
Well, yeah, hopefully it's not a windy period, but like on a day like today, we're having 35, 45 mile an hour gusts. So it's really windy. Things are blowing down. And so again, hopefully by the time of NABCEP, we've got nice, normal Reno, sunny, non-windy weather.
Yeah, and I guess what happens with the sagebrush, because that's the name of your company, is Sagebrush Energy, it will just start rolling like crazy, just rolling across the desert or wherever do you call it the desert?
Yeah, high desert, high desert. So we're at about 4,500 feet here. So yeah, Reno's technically considered the high desert.
Yeah, so when I think of Reno, there's a couple of different things that I think of. So there's Johnny Cash saying how I shot a man in Reno
Yep.
just to watch him die. So do you know Johnny Cash? Did you ever?
I'm a big Johnny Cash fan, so I know that line. I could have sang it along with you. I won't. But yeah, Reno's definitely famous for that line for sure.
Have you ever shot a man there?
I have not shot a man in
Yeah,
Reno.
not yet, but wait till the conference. It's going to be great. And then the other thing is that there's another song that I think of sometimes. So there's a guy that lit out from Reno when he was trailed by 20 hounds. Do you know that one? It's
Don't know that one. Who's it by?
That's a Grateful Dead song. So that's Jerry Garcia. I lit out from Reno. I was trailed by 20 hounds. So
Okay, I got to look that up. I'm going to listen to that.
and both of those songs I have played on the guitar before.
Great.
So that's my Reno songs, and those are some of the things I think of. Another thing that reminds me of Reno is one time I saw a concert over there in Sparks at a concert I guess it was at a casino outdoors, and it had Bob Marley's son singing just like Bob Marley. It was kind of crazy. It was like Bob Marley was there. So
Oh, interesting. I know exactly the venue you're talking about. I've seen a couple shows there. It's sort of a neat venue, outdoor. I think I saw actually a Bay Area band there. I saw Train play there a couple of years
oh,
ago.
great. Yeah, this was around 2000, and we were coming back from some famous party out in the desert there that I don't go to anymore. That's called Burning Man. So a lot of people probably know about that one too. What is Burning Man, I think, is in the Black Rock Desert, and it's about 2 hours north of Reno. So
Exactly. And Reno fills up before and after. It's sort of the jumping off point where a lot of people fly in or drive in and stock up their vans and head north. So even though it may be a couple hours north, we always know when Burning Man's happening here in Reno.
yeah, it's the closest city, and then everybody comes and washes off their dust.
Yep,
Lots of dust at that thing. So that there's
exactly.
probably going to be some of those burners at the NABCEP conference too, but you probably don't want to go out there this time of year. It's probably a crazy muddy mess. I guess they call it a dry lake bed out there. It's where they set a lot of the land speed records, like in the Guinness Book of World Records. And so a dry lake bed, I guess that would be in the summertime, and when it's raining, it's probably got a couple inches of water, maybe something like that.
Yeah, we've got a fair amount of that. Even here in Reno, some areas where I hike here in town where you've got, dry ponds during the summer, but then they fill up with water during when you have snow and rain. So yeah, absolutely.
Great. So tell us about solar in Reno. What should the NABCEP people be looking out for?
Reno actually is an interesting market in the sense that it's a bit of a budding clean tech area. And a lot of that's driven by the EV. We've got a Gigafactory here.
I think it's the biggest building in the world by footprint, the Tesla Gigafactory.
It's massive. I've been up there a couple times. I don't know if it's still the biggest, but yeah, it is a massive facility. And so an ecosystem's really built up around that. The other thing you mentioned, the desert up north, there's a lot of lithium in the ground there. So there's a whole lithium supply chain here where we do
Wow.
lithium mining. There's battery manufacturing. Obviously, now there's a lot of battery recyclers here in town. So Reno's interesting in that it is sort of a budding clean tech industry. And, it's a great market for solar, obviously. We get a ton of sun today being a bit of an anomaly, but we get well over 300 days of sunshine here. So, we've got a lot of utility scale solar. I happen to focus on residential solar, which is a growing market. So yeah, I mean, Nevada in general is just a fantastic market for solar, given all the sunshine that we get.
And it's pretty good for income taxes, is from what I've heard. I know some people that have moved there just for that. So what is it, like zero income taxes?
Yeah, there's zero state income tax. So we do get a lot of tax migrants from your state of California. And especially because we're only from where I'm sitting now, 20 miles from the California border. So yeah, there's a lot of folks, particularly retirees, who come from the Bay Area where you are for tax reasons and retire here. But yeah, Nevada is definitely known for not having a state income tax.
Yeah, I think I've talked to somebody where like they live in Nevada and they work in Nevada and they don't even make phone calls when they cross the border because they're afraid that they're going to get, it's going to change their income tax.
Yeah,
So,
California is notoriously aggressive in terms of protecting their tax base. So if they think someone is legitimately living in Nevada but pretending not to, yeah, it can get quite aggressive for sure.
yeah, and then it just like I'll call you back in an hour. I'm going to go back across the border. I just went to South Shore Lake Tahoe or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
So so yeah, kind of famous for that. And so tell us a little bit more too about the Tesla factory. How far is it from where the conference is going to be?
It's just due east it's probably 15, 20 miles east. So it's an easy drive. There's a lot of growth going on over there. A lot of tech firms have set up their data centers and things like that. So it's an easy trip for anyone who's at the conference and wants to go around. There's a fair amount of security there. So it's not like you can just go roam around the Gigafactory, but it is possible to get up close and get a sense for what you talked about, just the sheer magnitude of it.
Yeah, I remember some news story some years ago, and like Elon was up on the roof partying, what was he having, a marshmallow roast or something crazy like that? I don't remember what it was.
I wasn't invited to that. I missed that.
I know, dang, I would hold a grudge if I wasn't invited, and I lived right next to that. So, what can people see without being invited inside? Like, I know it's like I've seen pictures of the building, it's huge. Is there a good spot to go take a look at it for people that want to just drive out and check it out?
Yeah, I mean, if you just put it in your Google Maps and drive out there, you can obviously see the massive building out there. One thing I did see, I was out there a couple months ago for a meeting with not with Tesla, with a different company, and they're testing the Tesla semi trucks there. So I was driving by and came right by me because it looks like the nose of a normal Tesla car, but it was a semi tractor trailer. So that's maybe something more tangible that people can see out there. They do test vehicles that aren't on the market. And I happened to see that just a couple months ago driving around that area.
So is the best way you just go to like Google Maps, press right on the huge big building, and then just drive straight there? Is there any special lookout point or anything like that?
No, no, not that I'm aware of. Again, it's just desert out there. So there's not a whole lot out there. There's a lot of distribution facilities, large buildings, and things like that. But yeah, if somebody puts it on their Wayfinder and heads out, you can't miss it.
Is there a hill you could drive up where you can kind of get a more aerial type of view of it or
I
anything
think
like
there
that?
are, Sean. It's a pretty hilly area there. I haven't specifically hunted one down, but it's just the nature of the high desert out there. There are hills up there. So there probably is an ability to get a bit of a lookout.
Cool. That's pretty cool. So let's go NABCEP people. When we go to that conference, we're going to infiltrate it and check it out, maybe take it over, do some stuff like that. That sounds like a lot of fun. And so what other kind of renewable energy stuff? You were saying lithium mining. What's going on with the lithium there? I know that lithium is kind of abundant in the universe. It's the third element that was ever created after the Big Bang, if you believe in that Big Bang theory. And so there's a lot of it in the universe. I think a lot of people are like overly concerned that we're going to run out. But I guess the other thing too is like getting that lithium refined, because a lot of it's, say, in the ocean, where it's just diffused and it's kind of hard to separate it out that way. But you have one of the places where it's more concentrated over there, and maybe in some of those dry lake beds, things like that.
Exactly. Yeah, there is a fair amount of lithium mining that goes on here in Nevada, and I think it is more readily accessible and easily mineable than other places. And obviously, that's one of the reasons why this whole lithium supply chain has been created. And it's interesting because we literally do mining, and then there's manufacturing of the batteries. And then a big thing that's popped up is actually the recycling of those batteries. So there is sort of a full life cycle supply chain here in the greater Reno area just for lithium ion batteries.
Is there any particular reason why they picked the Reno area for the recycling?
The larger companies like Redwood actually is founded by, one of Elon's partners from Tesla. And I assume there's something to the proximity of, where the batteries are needed, where they're turned in, where they're recycled. So there's a benefit to proximity. And I think, frankly, there is some shared relationships of some of the founders of these companies.
Okay, great. Yeah, what's that I'm trying to think of his name.
It escapes me now too, Sean. I don't remember. Yeah.
And so I've even heard some like they can just leave the batteries sitting out there in the desert for a while and before they, start taking the different components out of them. And so there's a lot more than lithium inside the batteries, of course. There's going to be cobalt in a lot of those batteries, and that's kind of hard to get. And since you have such a proximity to the lithium mining, do you ever just bring the family out there for the weekend and go lithium mining, give the kids a shovel and a pick, or how does that work?
No, we've got Lake Tahoe to compete with that. So generally a day at Lake Tahoe out over the lithium mining trip.
Oh, the kids don't have any character, huh? No, kidding. Sorry, kids, just joking around. And so what does a lithium mine look like?
They're out in the middle of the desert, Sean, a lot of heavy equipment, no different, I think, than most mining sites that you would see. I'm certainly not an expert on lithium mining, but we've got a fair amount of mineral mining here in Nevada. A lot of the lithium's up north, but big pit with a lot of heavy equipment.
So they're just like digging a hole.
Yep, exactly.
And then that hole is probably getting kind of wet, filling up with water, and then they have some pumps, I guess, pumping that water out.
I would imagine so.
Do you know when they're getting the lithium, are they getting other things too? Or is it mostly just the lithium?
I don't know, Sean. It's a good question. I think it's primarily lithium, but we may have, other minerals here that are being mined at the same time.
Yeah, it's kind of better for if you're doing mining to have a hill that you're taking off, because then you get an electric powered dump truck, and then you go up the hill, you load it up, you bring it down the hill, and you get regenerative braking, and you don't ever have to charge it. I've heard of that happening. So
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because of everything we've talked about. One of the things that we see here, maybe not compared to the Bay Area where you are, but we've got a pretty high EV adoption rate here in Reno. And I think part of it is because there's so many people participating in some part of the industry. So again, we're not at Bay Area levels, but there's a pretty impressive EV adoption rate here in Reno.
Great, great. And so what else is going on with Reno? Like, so we're going to all be at the hotel there. And I guess it's like, do you know much about that place? I guess it's a casino also.
Yeah, it's at GSR, the Great Sierra Resort, right by the airport. There is a casino there as well. I often tell people who aren't familiar with Reno, there are two things to do. There's many more than two things to do, but two things that Reno is known for. One is obviously gambling. The casinos are here. I'm not much of a gambler, so I don't partake in that. But we've also got world-class hiking here, being right at the foot of the Sierras. So anybody coming into town, again, if your thing is gambling and you're staying at the GSR, I think you'll just have to go downstairs from your room and pull the slot machine lever. If that's not your bag, then there are plenty of great hiking trails around here, mountain biking. There's a lot of neat outdoors. I actually think Reno's one of the great cities to live in, especially if you're really into the outdoors, into hiking, biking, and things like that.
So I'm staying at the casino where the event's going to be, and probably a lot of people don't even leave the building the whole time they're there. Are there any hikes that you know of that are just right there, or do you have to get in a car?
It's sort of a downtown location, so there's nothing with a lot of elevation right out the door of the hotel. But pretty much from anywhere in Reno, you can go due west and you hit the Sierras, and there's trailheads everywhere. So, with a quick Uber or a quick drive, you can get to trailheads pretty much from anywhere in Reno.
And so you said it's downtown. So I think there's a famous sign there that's like, what does it call it? The biggest little
The biggest
city or
little
something?
city. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the GSR is a little bit south of downtown, but yeah, it's close to that area, right next to the airport.
So the biggest little city in the world sign, how far is that from the hotel? Like, is that a walk?
That you can walk. That'd be a little bit of a longer walk, but you could definitely do that. That's sort of right at the Truckee River, sort of at the heart of downtown Reno.
Okay, so then there's that river there. And I guess that river, it's kind of interesting to me, the Truckee River. So it starts up there somewhere where the mountains go up. I know there's like, what is it, Boreal Ski Resort or Donner Lake or something like that up there.
Exactly.
And then my brother used to live in a town called Floriston that's up there. You probably know that town.
Right off. Yeah, exactly.
And it's where they used to make ice before they had refrigeration. And
Oh,
in
interesting.
fact, a little thing about that, a lot of people will probably be driving by that. I think they invented the martini because they had ice that they were bringing from Floriston, where it gets freezing cold because it's like north facing. Solar people know about that. Then they would take it down in the train to Martinez, California, and that's how they came up with the martini. So,
Oh,
uh,
wow. Good
uh
to know. Good to know. Fun fact.
so think of that when you're driving by Floriston, and it's a little bit cool there on the north face, and it's just one of those things where you're between like Tahoe and Truckee or something like that.
Yeah, anybody who does that drive between the Bay Area and Reno a lot on I-80, you see that Floriston sign there, so I know exactly where it is.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's a nice little trip that a lot of people will be taking over that direction. Then you kind of like come over, and I guess it's been a little while since I've been in Reno. In fact, people could get married there, like it's one of those places where you don't need anything much. You just go down there and get married. I'm sure a lot of people have done it a whole bunch of times, but my grandparents, a little interesting history story about them is when they were getting married, it was like if you got married at the time, I think it was like around the Depression or something like that. And if you got married, the wife had to stop working. That was pretty much what it was. And so they wanted to do one where it was like kind of off the books. So they drove up to Reno and eloped so she didn't have to quit her teaching job. So
How interesting. How interesting. I didn't know that. That's a happy marriage story in Reno. There was a time when Reno was a place to come to get divorced. I think it was sort of back in the 40s, and they had these ranches. Something about the legal setup where Reno made it really easy for women to get legally divorced. I got a couple books behind me here about that time where there were literally these divorce ranches in Reno that women came to.
yeah, and just Nevada in general is pretty famous for people getting married because I think you could just pretty much do it on the spot. You could go, let's get married, and then you're married, something like that.
Exactly.
And I
Exactly.
don't know if the divorce is that easy, but it's probably easier than in California. And so then there's like a marriage industry there. And I think, like, I know in Las Vegas it's really big, and there's like drive-through weddings, and there's like Elvis weddings and all kinds of crazy
Yeah,
things.
exactly.
So you get
Exactly.
married by Elvis and all that. So yeah. So I just was remembering too, like who has that company that's called Redwood Materials that does the battery recycling that co-founded Tesla, and that guy's name is J.B. Straubel.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I was kind of thinking his name, I just didn't want to get it wrong. So that's pretty
Yeah, so
cool.
that's another company that's sort of contributing to this ecosystem that I talked about and what really is a budding clean tech industry here in Reno, which is great.
Uh-huh. Yep. Great. And so what other things are in Reno? So like there's going to be people that are in town at the conference wondering like, oh, I want to go experience Reno, and and I guess it's like probably they're not talking about hiking. I don't know. It's a NABCEP conference, so there's probably a lot of people that like to do hiking and stuff like that. And it is beautiful up there in the desert. But also maybe they're just like, what's the most popular thing to do in town? There's a whole bunch of casinos. And what ours is called the GSR, the Grand Sierra Resort, but there's probably
Exactly.
some other more famous ones, I guess they might want to check out.
Yeah, there's some of the brands that you'd be accustomed to seeing in Las Vegas, like Circus Circus. There's a couple of the brands you'd recognize. There's others like the Peppermill is here, the Nugget. There's a handful of them in town. There's one called Atlantis, which you can see pretty prominently in the skyline. So yeah, there's no shortage of casinos to choose from. And the other thing I'd throw out, Sean, I think most people know this, but perhaps not, even if people don't want to go out physically, do a hike. We are really close to Lake Tahoe. And for people who haven't been to Lake Tahoe, it's one of the
Oh
most
yeah.
stunning places on earth. So that's just over the hill behind me here, the north shore of Lake Tahoe. So that's another thing. If people are coming in and they've never been to Tahoe, it's well worth the drive over the hill just to get some
Oh
of the
yeah.
beautiful views of the lake.
Yeah, Lake Tahoe is magical. Anybody that's never seen that should see it, and anybody that's only seen it once should see it twice. And how long does it take to get there?
It's just 35 minutes over the hill to the North Shore. And for those of us who live in Reno, we're sort of North Shore snobs. A lot of people, when they think of Lake Tahoe, think of South Lake Tahoe, where all of the casinos are. It's a little more subdued and laid back on the North Shore. So that North Shore of Tahoe is really just a little over a half hour from where I'm sitting, maybe a little bit more from downtown. Now, if someone did want to go all the way to the South Shore, that's a much longer drive. That's well over an hour. But to get to what I think are some of the most beautiful parts of the lake on the north and the northeast shore of the lake, it's a very quick drive here from Reno.
Yeah, when I was a kid, we used to go boat camping at Emerald Bay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's kind of more North Shore-ish up that direction.
No, that's way
So-
on the south end. So that's way on the southwest corner of the lake. So that's just to the west of South Lake Tahoe. So it's well worth it. It's beautiful, but that's a bit of a further drive. On the North Shore, you've got things like Incline Village and things like that on the north side. But yeah, Emerald Bay is way down on the south side of the
Is
lake.
it like Tahoe City? Is that?
Yeah, Tahoe City's on the west side of the lake. So if you
Okay.
were coming from Reno and you wanted to drive down to Emerald Bay, for example, Tahoe City's on the way down there.
Okay, great. Yep. And then people run races around the lake. What is it, like 100-mile ultra marathon or something like that?
The circumference of the lake is about 75 miles. They're running races. I a couple times have trained to do what they call the Tour de Tahoe, which is a cycling race around. I haven't actually done it yet. I've done a lot of cycling around the lake. But yeah, there's a lot of neat activities, whether they're marathons, half marathons, cycling races. There's a lot to do up there.
Great. So out of all the casinos in Reno, what would you say would be like the most modern one that somebody might want to check out that's into casinos? Probably a lot of people could care less about casinos, but
I am the worst source on this, Sean. I don't gamble at all, so I never step foot in these places. I'm a horrible resource for that. So I don't even know which one would be considered most modern. So I'll have to leave it to some of the other attendees to be a better source of information on that. Hiking trails I can help with, casinos no.
And then how about more about the Truckee River? I think it's kind of an interesting river because it dead ends out in the desert. I think it's Pyramid Lake.
That's right.
It's not too long of a river, but it's not too small of a river when it's going through Reno. It's got a lot of water going through it.
Absolutely. It was funny. I was driving along the Truckee a couple weeks ago. In fact, it was when I was going out near the Giga factory there. And I find it really fascinating because you almost get the different generations of transportation. And this is the case in many parts of the country, but you've got the Truckee River, which obviously served as a means of transportation and transporting goods and people. And you've got the railroad right next to it. So when the railroads came, they, of course, very often built right next to the rivers so that they could move goods from the water onto trains, and in this case, move it further east. And now, of course, you've got I-80 that runs right along the railroad track. So when you drive on that, east of Reno out to the desert along I-80, you literally see these different generations of transportation, each about, a couple hundred yards from each other. I find it really interesting.
Great. Well, maybe I'll hobo it up there on the train. That'll be kind of fun.
Yeah. It's primarily, yeah, exactly. It's mostly moving goods at this point, not a lot of commuter trains. But yeah, if you hobo it, no problem.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSean, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the solar industry there. So there's your company, Sagebrush Energy, and I'm sure there's some other companies up there. What's the solar market like? Is it more commercial, residential, utility scale? What are you involved in?
Yeah, so there's a ton of utility scale here just because of the sunshine that we get. So there's a lot of that activity going on. I would like to see a lot more commercial. One of the things that people comment a lot when they come to Reno, we've got a lot of warehouses here. It's a very popular distribution center. So we've got a lot of empty roofs, which for me are just screaming for solar panels to be put all over them. And for a variety of reasons, that hasn't happened yet. But I hope one day to be part of making commercial solar a lot bigger. And then yeah, I'm in the residential space, which is a growing market, and I think we're about to enter a period that's going to be very good for solar in Reno specifically, but in Nevada in general. We've had some legislative changes that have helped to really clean up the market and move some of the bad practices out. So there's some really high quality companies left in Reno doing good work in the residential market. Like everywhere, we've got increasing electricity rates from our
Yay.
monopoly utility. So I think it's a good time to be getting into solar. It's one of the things that drew me to it. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of growth to be had in the upcoming residential solar market.
And I imagine that when you say your electricity rates are going up, it's still probably way less than California.
Yeah, you'll laugh when I say what it is, Sean. We're 12 and a half cents a kilowatt hour. So it's nothing compared to what you have in California, but it is increasing. We're expecting another rate increase. There was a big proposal by Nevada Energy to triple the basic service charge, which fortunately got rejected. But like everywhere, I think rates are going up here. But yeah, nothing comparable to what you have in
12 and
California.
a half cents. Wow. And so for residential, do you have time of use, or I guess you must net metering, all that stuff?
We have both net metering and time of use. Time of use isn't as widely used as I'd like. I have it here at my home, but I think if most recent statistics are right, it's 1% of people are using time of use. We do have net metering, not as generous as it used to be. There was a big hubbub here, 7, 8 years ago, you may remember, where net metering was canceled. There was a big outcry about that. It's now enshrined in our state constitution. So I hope we're going to have net metering for a long time to come. But yeah, it definitely helps with getting the economics of solar to work.
Yeah, especially when you have such relatively low electricity prices, you really need something like that. And so 12 and a half cents per kilowatt hour and not too many people doing time of use with net metering. How about energy storage? Is that a big thing? Because energy storage really takes off like if they ruin net metering, but you've got net metering there and it's very inexpensive electricity, relatively speaking, compared to like a lot of places where they do energy storage. So I guess it would be more for backup.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mention it, Sean. And there's been a massive change even since I've started Sagebrush. So when I conceived of starting the company, I estimated we'd have 10% battery attachment rate, maybe 20 if we were lucky. What we're seeing now is closer to 60%, even with net metering. And I'll tell you why. It's all about the wildfire risk. We're unfortunately in a heavy wildfire area here. And as you know, ever since was it the park fire or the camp fire that bankrupted PG&E? And ever since that happened, these Western utilities are very, very cautious. And so what happens here frequently in Reno, we talked about the wind. If you have a highly windy day, the utility will decharge the lines. So we've started to get a lot of outages here. And so what we're seeing, we get a lot of calls for people who honestly don't even raise solar. They say, I want a battery, I need backup, because you know how it is. Frankly, people are tired of throwing the contents of their refrigerator away. Many people work from home now. The internet goes out. So what we're seeing, like I said, is a 60% battery attach rate, driven not so much by the economics, but driven by people's desire to have resilience and to have backup and not have their lives interrupted. So it's been a real big change, even in the last year, because we've had so many outages. We had some just over the weekend. We had heavy winds. I think we had about 7,500 people who lost power here. So yeah, battery attach rates increasing a lot. Fortunately, as you well know, the costs are coming down, so it's getting more economical for consumers. But the demand is really being, unlike what's happening in the California market, where it's all NEM3 driven, it's really backup driven here in the Reno market.
So I imagine there's probably a whole lot of people that are working in the tech industry or, Tesla industry over in your area. So a lot of them probably have a lot going on with their internet connection and the office in Silicon Valley and stuff like that. And so I could see why they would really want to have some good battery backup. I remember I was talking to a guy at a law firm. I put solar on his building a long time ago, and he wanted to get the energy storage. He's like, you know what? I've got 10 attorneys working here, and if they're charging $350 an hour, if I'm out of power for 1 hour, that could pay for the battery or, stuff like that. So
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I hear stuff like that. I certainly hear the work related things. I heard so much of people who were just infuriated multiple times this summer, having to literally empty their refrigerators and their freezers and throw everything away. So there's economic cost to that as well. And not to mention, there are people who have life sustaining technology in their home now that needs to have a constant source of electricity. So I think we've all become so dependent upon electricity in our homes. And that's why I think the battery backup's just a great solution. And like I said, we're getting a lot of people who are calling us not about solar first, but about batteries first.
yeah, and I think kind of too, you're talking about the desert and you're isolated in a lot of places that are not right at Reno. And so there's a lot of people that are more independent minded and kind of like libertarian prepper and stuff like that. There's probably a lot of people who just want to disconnect from the grid out of principle.
That's right. I mean, whenever you do, residential solar sales, you see that whole gamut. There's a lot of people who come at it from an environmental perspective and they want to, proactively fight climate change. And you're right, on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who want nothing to do with the utility. They want to be disconnected and totally off the grid. So yeah, perhaps Nevada's a little bit more like that, like you said, sort of the Wild West mentality. But yeah, we definitely have the full spectrum of the reasons why people buy solar here in Reno.
Great. So your company, are you doing more like residential, commercial, utility scale?
No, we're primarily residential, Sean. We'll do a little bit of C&I, a little bit of small commercial work, but primarily we're in the residential market.
Do you see people that are just like buying a lot in the desert for real cheap and then wanting to go off grid and get some system that, doesn't even connect to the grid, standalone, do some islanding?
So there's some of that. There's definitely some of that where people want to be completely off the grid. Where you see a lot of people buying land, frankly, is much more in the commercial space. There is a lot of, speculative land buying going on. One of the other things that is always important to remember about Nevada, this often surprises people when they hear it. 80% of our land here in Nevada is owned by the federal government. So a lot of it is, BLM land, and there's a lot of controversial projects right now to put a lot more solar in the Nevada desert. And a lot of that sort of gets thrown up in the air when political administrations change. But yeah, a lot of the land stuff inevitably involves the federal government because the federal government owns such a large part of the state of Nevada.
Great. Yeah. And so that's 80%. So that's the Bureau of Land Management, BLM. So
Yeah, and it's not all BLM. Yeah, there's a number of different agencies, but the entire federal government, the ownership of the land is about 80%.
And is there wild horses out there in Nevada? I think I've heard about that too.
In fact, we get them right here in the neighborhood where I live. There's a ton of them. And it's one of the sad things that you see with all these wildfires because it obviously disturbs their habitat. But yeah, right here in Reno, particularly in the south part of Reno where I live, it's not unusual to see wild horses around, and they're still in residential neighborhoods and things like that. So I believe they can be somewhat controversial. I think it's a neat part of living here that we've actually got wild horses,
Yeah, cool.
who have a
Yeah.
couple hundred years of lineage in the area still in an urban area like that. It's kind of neat.
Uh-huh. So you say that like the horses lineage, a couple
Yeah,
hundred
yeah.
years. That's
Yeah,
pretty
they've
cool.
been in these areas for centuries. And so it's sort of neat. And obviously, as Reno's grown, and Reno's a very fast growing city, it's encroaching on their habitat. So you have a lot of unfortunate things. They get hit by cars and things like that. But yeah, there's a group here in town who really do a lot to try to protect their environment and make sure they're safe. But yeah, there are hundreds of them here just in the South Reno area.
So is the group protecting the wild horses called the Rolling Stones? Wild horses
I
didn't
don't know.
take me away.
If it's not, it should be. I like that.
Yeah, and is there any way that people that are at the conference would get a good chance at seeing some wild horses? I'd think that would be kind of cool. I've never really seen any.
It's sort of neat. I mean, on the south side of town, there's something called Washoe Lake. It's sort of the less popular cousin of Lake Tahoe. It's on the other side of the hill. I do a lot of paddle boarding out there, and there's a ton of wild horses out there. So if one of the best chances to do it would be make a trip to Washoe Lake, which is just on the south side of town. It's not far. And I see wild horses out there constantly.
So I could come out there with a bridle and do some barebacking?
I stay away from them, honestly. They're
Uh-huh.
pretty, they are wild for sure.
Yeah.
So the good advice is to leave them on their own and steer clear of them.
Yeah,
But
cool.
they're
So,
beautiful to look at.
uh-huh. Yep, yep. My family's had horses right over here in the county where I live in since the 1850s. And so I still have some. So it's like
Wow, fantastic.
we've got like some generations going on here. We're not quite at 200 years, but I think I'll get there, you know?
Yeah,
So I'll be
absolutely.
kind of old in the 2050s. So that's pretty cool. I'd love to go see some wild horses, and we call that wild horses are sort of like renewable energy. So they were how we had transportation, and the horses were eating the grain and the grass. And that's how these nomads like Genghis Khan pretty much took over more land than any person in the world. And so we're here talking about energy. So that was just, part of the evolution of energy.
That's right. That's right.
Little bit of horse food in there. So do the horses eat the sagebrush? I wonder.
They do eat sagebrush. They live off the land out here. And so there's a lot of sagebrush here. But yeah, I mean, it's one of their food sources.
I'll have to bring some sagebrush back for Cody and chocolate then. Uh, so your company, you've been there in Reno for a while, and I was just kind of looking at some other things that you did. It was just kind of interesting to me. I'm looking at your LinkedIn page. PopSockets? Were you the president of PopSockets? I mean, they make stuff that I put on my phone all the time.
Hey, they do. I did. I ran the international business. A lot of my career was actually overseas before I came to Reno. So I ran the entire international business for PopSockets at a time.
That's pretty cool. Oh, and it looked like, were you in Boulder when that happened?
Yeah, PopSockets is headquartered in Boulder, still a place where I spend a fair amount of time, a great solar city, by the way. But yeah, that was the company's headquartered in Boulder.
And so that's probably how we were introduced, because Riley of Solar for Women, who's already been on the podcast, she just introduced us on LinkedIn, and that's how we met. So that's pretty
That's
cool.
exactly right. Yeah, my last trip to Boulder, she and I had lunch, and what a inspiration she is. Everything she's done for the industry. I just found it. Her story, I heard her on your pod first, and then I've fortunately had a chance to get to know her, and just what an inspiration for the industry.
Yeah, and then they also have ACES, the American Solar Energy Society, headquartered in Boulder. And this coming summer is going to be the ACES conference, and I'm going to be there. And I hope everybody else is going to be there too. It's always a lot of fun, and it's in a beautiful place. It's at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and every other ACES conference is there. And it's just like a lot of good people, a lot of fun. And then I also get to see a friend of mine, the past president of International Solar Energy Society, is going to be there too, Dave Renee. And so just like a lot of fun. And then another company that I saw that you were working for that I buy their products is Allbirds. So the president of International for Allbirds, are you what made those so popular that my girlfriend had to buy me a couple of pairs? And I bought some Allbirds in Boulder too.
Yeah, they've got a store in Boulder. I did. I ran international for Allbirds as well. I can't take credit for the massive popularity of the shoes. Maybe I can a little bit overseas. I ended up opening a lot of countries in Europe and Asia to get distribution for Allbirds. But yeah, great sustainable company, natural fibers. The shoes are made of, super comfortable as it sounds like But yeah, I did a stint there, San Francisco based company. I'm a Bay Area native. So yeah, neat company. And I did a lot, particularly internationally for them.
Great. Where are you from in the Bay Area?
So I was born in Mountain View. I
That's
think when I was born, it wasn't called Silicon Valley yet, but what's now called
uh-huh.
Silicon
Yeah.
Valley.
Yeah.
And
And I lived
then,
in Mountain View for a little bit. Yeah.
okay, I grew up down in Orange County. And then, as I mentioned, I lived overseas for most of my career. And the whole time that I lived overseas, I kept a place in San Francisco. That had been my US home base for all the years I lived in China, India, Japan, all the countries that I lived in. So
Cool.
still very much a Bay Area boy. Like I said, now I'm 20 miles from the California border, but still very much a native Californian.
Yeah. And I know somebody that goes back and forth from Oakland to Reno a lot. And he was telling me when you jump on that flight, there's all these people that are working at Tesla, and they're wearing their Tesla jackets, and they're on their laptops the whole time. and it's just like a little, what is it, a 30-minute jump, something like that. So it's a pretty easy commute.
Yeah, the only thing you got to be careful of is during the winter, if I-80, if the pass closes, that makes it a little bit tricky. I go over there a lot. I prefer to drive than do the short flight. But yeah, it's a popular commute for people who want to continue living in the Bay Area, but whose job is here in Reno.
Yeah, it just sounds kind of neat, just commuting in and out. So I wonder then, I guess since they're living in California, working in Reno, then they're still paying their state income tax, probably.
I would assume so. There's a lot of sort of rules that the IRS has about the amount of time you spend somewhere. So I guess if they were creative and they managed to spend the appropriate amount of time in Nevada, they could avoid the California tax. But if they're above that threshold, most likely they're still paying California tax.
Yeah, and so I wonder what if it was the other way around, if you lived in Reno and then worked in California, and it's so close that you can pretty much commute. And I'm sure a lot of people do. There's
Oh, it's
probably
very
people
common, Sean. It's
yeah.
very common. And like it's an easy drive, especially maybe not all the way down to the South Bay, but it's an easy drive. And you talked about the Oakland to Reno. They're both essentially downtown airports, right? They're urban airports. They're easy to get to. So it's not like you've got a long drive to the airport. So it does make it a really convenient commute.
So do you think that they should put up a border wall between Nevada and California?
I'm not going to comment on that. Boy, especially as close as I am to the border. It's funny. I was driving yesterday here in town, and somebody's put up a big billboard here in Reno saying, "Don't let Nevada become California." So anyway, like I said, I'm a fifth generation Californian. I'm very proud of my California heritage, as much as I love being a Nevadan now. So I'm not in favor of a border. I go back and forth all the time. I have kids who have activities in the Bay Area, and obviously I've got a lot of ties to the Bay Area. So I don't want to see a border wall.
Yeah, and I know there's one place when I go to Tahoe, when you come back, they inspect your car. I
Yeah,
think.
there's anytime you cross the border from Nevada into California, California's got I don't know if it's for agricultural items or what they're looking for, but yeah, there's a border check there. Again, I think it's largely for agricultural items, things like that.
So do you know good ways to sneak around for all the NABCEP people?
I don't. I don't. I'm not gonna abet any crimes here.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, I'll try to figure that out and let people know another time. We'll keep it low key. So, so yeah, I imagine like tons and tons of people there. Like you said, you're born in California. I would almost think that would maybe even be the norm. I mean, people make fun and they're just like, oh yeah, places like Nevada is a suburb of California, haha. And then people from Nevada wouldn't like it that I said that, but.
No, not at all. For many good reasons. Nevadans are very proud. It's a population who's very proud of their state, as they should be. And look, we have a lot of migrants from California. We talked about the reasons for tax, but there's a lot of reasons to come out here. It's a little bit slower way of life. We don't have nearly the traffic, of either Southern California or the Bay Area. So it's got a lot going for it. And it is very unique in its own way. And certainly not just an extension of California by any means.
Yeah, my uncle Roger lives in Reno on the Truckee River. So, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, lots and lots of connections. So, let's see, any other things that we should talk about that are just kind of like good for our topic here? NABCEP Reno, NABCEP Conference, all that kind of stuff. And I know that by the time we release this, because we're going to hold it back right till before the conference, probably the conference will be sold out if it's anything like the last, I don't know, 5 conferences or something like that. So speaking of like getting across the border, like maybe there'll be some smuggling going on into the conference. We'll see if we could get some NABCEP coyotes. Ow, ow.
I
Get
may need to get one of those. I may need to get one.
people in there, and I'm teaching the NABCEP PV Associate class there, and that one's always been selling out too, like most of the conference. But you never know, maybe there's some more tickets or something like that, and it's always a great time. And if people can't make it this time, they'll make it the next time. I don't know when they'll announce where it's going to be the next time, but I think last year maybe it was in Raleigh from what I can remember. But
That's
usually
right.
when I go to these conferences, it's like I go inside the hotel or wherever the conference is, and it's just a great time. You go in there, they're making you 3 meals a day, plus snacks and things like that, plus coffee. And there's like a big room, and in between the classes, everybody meets in the room and they have their meals. And there's some booths in there where people are advertising their stuff. You see all your friends, and then one night they're going to do something like karaoke. And I remember it used to even be like open mic night, and it's just a lot of fun. And It's almost like people don't want to leave because they're just having so much fun seeing all their friends. And you go to a lot of conferences and there's a big broad range of people where it's all good, but there's like the business, the sales, all this kind of stuff. And you go to the NABCEP conference, it's the technical people, the people that are doing what I'm doing, what you're doing. And, they're designing systems. It's called the Continuing Education Conference. So, most people are probably already NABCEP certified, getting their continuing education requirements met, but also it would qualify for prerequisites. There's also a way where you could just buy a pass and go there to hang out. But you can sit through the classes if you're not certified, I believe. And then my class is the associate class. And it's for people that are just trying to get into solar. And the unfortunate thing about my class is when I go, I don't really get to see the other people speak because I'm speaking the whole time, which I do a lot. I'll do a lot of these intensive classes. So I think I'm going to be teaching for like about 18 hours. And then people qualify to take the associate exam after the class. Plus, we put them in the Heat Spring 18-hour PVA boot camp, which people can still take even if they don't go to the conference. There's a lot of people that take that class, and they also get all the meals and stuff. So it's a great deal. It's like 3 for 1 almost if you just look at all the different prices for everything. So people should check out the conference any year. It's always a good thing, and check out the other conferences. So there's going to be other conferences coming up later in the year. Of course, we're going to have the RE Plus in Vegas. And that's going to be, I believe, at the Venetian again, which is not too far from the Sphere. We could see who's going to be playing at the Sphere that time. And Intersolar will have already passed by the time we release this, but that one is in San Diego. And then I'm also probably going to be going to the Intersolar, which they also call the Smarter E, and that's going to be in Munich in Germany. So that'll be kind of fun to have some pretzels and stuff and meet some European solar people there. I've done that one a whole bunch of times. And also I've done a whole bunch of times the biggest solar conference in the world, and it's called SNEC, and it's in Shanghai. And they say there's about 500,000 people there. And so that's always a good one too.
That sounds great. Well, as someone who lived in Shanghai for 10 years, and I never went to SNEC, but I'd love to get back there and check that one out.
Oh, you got to go just coordinate it for your visit back. So.
Yeah, definitely. What time of year is that, Sean?
Yeah, so I'm going to be staying at the Intercontinental Hotel, which is right in the middle of the conference center. And I'm going to be leaving on June 8th. I arrive there on the 9th, and then I come back on the 13th. And you know what? I don't even need a visa. I think it's 6 days or less now flying into Shanghai. You don't need a visa. I did have a 10-year visa, and it expired. And it just makes it easier. So I could go 144 hours, which would be 6 times 24. So that's June is when SNEC's going to be. And then almost exactly a month before that is Intersolar in Munich. And I'm going to be staying at the Hilton Garden Inn there over in Munich. And it looks like I'm going to be there from the 5th to the 9th of May. And I believe it starts on the 6th. And that one's a lot of fun too.
Great. Well, you're going to be busy, that's for sure.
In fact, even after that, I'm signed up to speak at the conference, the RE Plus in Texas, and that's going to be on May 13th through 15th. And so people should check that out too. That's a growing conference too. So, the solar industry in Texas is growing, and that would be over there in Houston. So that's going to be a lot of fun too.
Great. Well, we're certainly looking forward to having everyone here in Reno. We've got a couple days in the spotlight, so we're very much looking forward to having everyone in town soon.
Yeah, great. And do you mind if I invite everyone to stay at your house?
I'd prefer not. My wife may not like that, Sean.
Okay. All right. Maybe just a lucky person. I remember when Intersolar used to be in San Francisco. So San Francisco is famous for super high hotel prices and things like that. And I would have people staying at my house, and my mom's house, and my boat, all kinds of things, just because, people are just trying to come to town, go to a conference. And so that's one of the benefits of having the conference in a place like Las Vegas or Reno, where it's like there's already a whole bunch of people staying there because people like to throw their money away in these one-armed bandits, and they never run out of hotels at these places. Also in Anaheim is another one too, because of Disneyland. So there's plenty of hotel spaces at those places. So
Well, while I can't offer a room, if anybody wants to stop by the Sagebrush Energy office, they're more than welcome to. Not terribly far from the Grand Sierra Resort. So if anyone wants to talk solar in Reno, by all means, pay us a visit at Sagebrush.
great, awesome. Yeah, my brother also went to school there at UNR. So
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Great
he's
school.
a
Yeah.
wildlife biologist. Yep.
Oh,
So
interesting.
walked around that campus a little bit there too. And another company I know that's from the area, I think they're in Reno, Battleborn. Do you know them? The battery company.
Yeah,
And they
yeah. I was going to say there's a lot of companies named Battleborn in Nevada, but yeah,
oh yeah.
I'm roughly familiar with them.
Yeah, so in fact, that's why my brother got the Battleborn batteries. Is there was some kind of Reno connection, and he went to UNR, and he lives up in Alaska now, and we installed some Battleborn lithium iron phosphate batteries. I think they were 24 volt, is what they called them, but really that's using the lead acid naming system. But they seem to be working well up there in
Yeah,
cold
like I said, there
Alaska.
does seem to be a real sort of emerging ecosystem of everything related to the battery supply chain, which is great.
Great, great. Okay, so let's see. Anything else you want to talk about?
I'm happy to talk a little bit, Sean, if you like, about, sort of the residential solar market here in Reno. I'd love to chat with people when they're here in Reno, but I do think especially for people attending NABCEP and installers and professionals, there is a lot of interesting stuff going on here. We've had some good regulatory changes which have helped the market and, like I said, cleaned up some of the bad actors that were here. So again, happy to chat with people when they're here in Reno about that, because there's some interesting things I think to be learned legislatively and regulatory wise here in Nevada.
Well, do you want to talk about it right now? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. We, like a lot of other residential solar markets, frankly, there's some bad actors who got involved, aggressive sales tactics, all of those things. And
We got to take those people out to the
well,
desert.
yeah. And there's ways to
Yeah.
do it, Sean. It's actually one of the reasons I got into the industry is I was so passionate about climate change and clean energy. And as I got into solar, I frankly got disgusted by some of the stuff that I saw. And so one of the things that Sagebrush has tried to do is be a small part of the solution to really do right by consumers in residential solar. And fortunately, we've got some local companies here who managed to work with our state legislature and passed a law. It was called Senate Bill 293 a couple of years ago. And it essentially outlawed a lot of these 1099 sales organizations. So I now in Nevada, I have to employ my sales team. So a lot of this thing, people knocking on doors and all this stuff that we hate about residential solar
Yeah.
has been cleaned up in our market here. It's great because two things happened at once. Number one, it cleaned out a lot of the bottom feeders who were doing this door-to-door sales, and they weren't even the ones doing the installs. As you know, they were selling these things and making promises to consumers that they shouldn't have and disappointing consumers. So this bill has essentially banned that. So number one, the small fly-by-night folks have gone away. And at the same time, in a market like Reno, the big national players don't really want to invest in a big infrastructure, which by law they have to do now, have a sales organization. So it's really cleaned up our local market and it's left us with some really good, solid players. And I'm a big believer that, residential solar should be a community business. We're a community company. And so now here in Reno, we've got some good community-based companies doing solar. And a lot of the sort of nonsense that had been going on in the industry, I'm happy to say, has been cleaned up.
That's an interesting way to go about it. So you get rid of the 1099 solar people. Is there like a Nevada organization that spearheaded that, or how did that happen?
It was before I got in the industry, but there's a couple local players in town who worked with the state legislature and they passed this bill, which essentially required that you have W-2 employees rather than these 1099 folks. So it was driven by the local solar industry here in town. And it's been great for the industry. Like I said, it, at the same time, sort of flushed out the bottom feeders and it moved a lot of the national players out who were employing all these 1099 door knockers. So I do think it's an effective mechanism to sort of clean out the less savory elements of the industry that we want out.
That's pretty cool because I think it can get kind of difficult to get rid of that because some of the bigger companies are the ones also making the big donations to the big solar organizations.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Sean. I mean, I hope that our industry trade groups are going to really take this seriously because it's one of the things I've learned since getting in the industry. It's a serious problem. It's tainted the reputation of residential solar, which I find terrible. And I do think
Definitely.
the tactics that they're using, I think about this all the time. I mean, nobody wants someone coming to their door to sell them something. I'm sorry, nobody wants
Mhm.
that. And solar remains one of the only industries left where this is happening. And I think it's shameful. And unfortunately, it's being driven by the big national players in our industry. So I'm really proud of what Nevada has done and really sort of clean that up. And I think it's going to bode well for residential solar in Nevada.
That's pretty awesome. I kind of like that solution. I know that I was driving by the grocery store the other day, and some person was so upset that they made their own sign, kind of like a political sign on the side of the road, and it named the big, huge solar company that we've all heard of. And then they were like, fix your mess. And I just felt terrible about that. One of the things, too, is I am the president of NorCal Solar. It's a 51-year-old solar nonprofit organization here in California. We're going to have our second annual 50th anniversary party this year. Haha. And one of the things, too, is like trying to figure out what our mission is. And so the original mission was to educate the public, and it was like showing people what a solar module looks like on a house. Well, everybody's seen that now. Like a lot of people have it, or their neighbor has it, and things like that. So what's the new mission? And the new mission has to do with, or at least I'm trying to get a lot of talk about it, bringing it up. There's going to be a lot of missions and things like that. But it's to kind of prevent what you're talking about, which is giving the industry a bad name, which is when people are selling something and they don't know what they're talking about, and they're, getting the customer mad. I'll just say that that's the wrong. And you can look so many different places on, like for where there's reviews. Like that's one of the solutions that I have, is to go look at Google and Yelp and the Better Business Bureau. And those things aren't perfect, and you can kind of buy them off one way or another. But you can see some pretty bad reviews out there for some companies. And other things are, I'm suggesting to like ask your neighbor. Another thing is to go look at the contractor board. So make sure that people are licensed at what they're doing. In Nevada, do you have a place to look for that?
We do. You can go right on the Nevada State Contractors Board website and you can pull up the license for companies. I think you're absolutely right. And we've got a fairly rigorous process here in Nevada. I know having gone through it, and I'm glad for it because it's essentially qualifying people and getting people in. But yeah, it's something here in Nevada. It's very easy to check if your solar installer is licensed. And I think all the other things you mentioned, Sean, are exactly right. I would go even a little further. I mean, it's funny, 15 minutes before I got on this pod with you, a friend of my wife's called and she knows that I'm in solar. Her husband signed a contract with a company that has no location in Reno, signed a contract, they did a design, and this was months ago. And they're saying it's hung up in permitting. And again, they don't have any local people here. And so she called me for help. How do I get out of this? And obviously we're going to help, but I would just recommend, there are so many good local solar installers out there who you can actually go visit in your towns. And I just strongly recommend, these are the people who are going to be around for a long time rather than the sort of fly by night people. So, I'm a big proponent of using your local solar installers, but do your homework, check them out by all means, but they're really good local solar folks out there.
So here's where I have the pointers. And so if you just went to norcalsolar.org, click on About, and you can go down the page a little bit, and it talks about ethical sales. And the number one thing that we have there is to go look at the NABCEP certified directory. So to tell people to go to the NABCEP website, and you can see who has any kind of NABCEP credential. And another reason why this kind of helps out is if somebody did mess up and they had a NABCEP credential, NABCEP will take it away from them. They'll remove them from the website. They'll take away their certification. And then we were talking about the different databases. And if you don't know where your state lists all these things, it's pretty easy to do on a Google search, but you could also go to IREC's website. That would be irecusa.org, and check it out. But we have a link right over here. And ask the neighbors, ask people that have solar on their houses, all that kind of stuff. And that's very helpful. And the other mission too that I sort of have, and that we have, has to do with the solar coaster. And so everybody's heard of the solar coaster, and it goes up and down, and they changed the net metering policy, and California has to lay off a whole bunch of people, and then the price of electricity goes up, and then all of a sudden all those people need to get hired back again. I'd like to just encourage anybody making policy to make the changes gradual. So not to make sudden changes. And instead of having the solar coaster, it's better to just have a gradual up than a whole bunch of sudden ups and downs. And I know that's kind of hard to do with government and politics and all that kind of stuff. But those are just some of my thoughts. I also really am thinking more about what you were saying is the 1099 thing. And so probably most people know what a 1099 is like if you're doing some work for somebody, not as an employee, you fill out a form called a W-9, and then the person, in order to get a tax deduction for paying you, they have to give you a 1099 during the month of January. And so they will send out the 1099 forms, and then you give that to your accountant and you pay taxes on that money that you made. And so what you're saying is these solar salespeople are not employees. They're just people that are just, working for the leads and things like that. And one of the things that I get overwhelmed with is on LinkedIn, I get so many people trying to sell me qualified leads and all this kind of stuff. And those are probably the people like that you were talking about, knocking on doors and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, they're not all bad people. There's like actually a lot of people taking my classes. They're like, man, I heard you could get rich going door to door with solar. I know somebody else that did. And they're just like people trying to make a living and things like that. And so I don't have anything against the people that are trying those jobs out and stuff like that. But we want to make sure that they know what they're doing, that they're educated, and ideally that they're NABCEP certified. One of the things that I do ask people when they cold call me or something like that, and it happens about every time, I go like, oh, do you have a NABCEP certification, like NABCEP technical sales? And they're like, oh yeah, we're NABCEP certified. I'm NABCEP certified. And you're like, that's great. What's your name? I'm going to look you up on the NABCEP website. And that's how you can find the first lie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right off the bat. And so far, none of them have been NABCEP certified, and all of them have said they are.
I think another good test, Sean, is asking if you encounter one of these sales folks, ask them if the same company, whoever they represent, is actually going to install the system on your house, right? Because that's another problem is the sales and the installation is separate very often.
That's a good
when
one.
you've got these people. And so my own opinion is that you want to buy a system from the people who are going to put the system on your roof, and those people are going to be in business for years to come. They can service your system. So I think the whole separation of sales and install is also not good for the industry. And that's where all your lead generation and kind of stuff like that comes in. So we're very proud of the fact that all of the sales folks work for us, the install folks work for us, and it's all one company. It's not disconnected.
Yeah. And so maybe the other thing to do is ask them for their W-2.
Yeah. They may not share that given the privacy, the stuff that's on it. But I think just confirming that the person who's selling you the system, that company is going to actually install your system.
That's a good one.
It's really important.
Yeah. And I also tell people too, to find out how long it's going to take them to sell it. And I've seen people sell a system and then 2 years later it gets installed. And that's bad. So that should be in the contract or something, that it's not going to take 2 years.
And that's the call that I got right before this pod was exactly that. This person, they were just stuck. And again, they don't have local contacts with the permitting folks and the government. So I think that's right. I mean, there's some interesting statistics, Sean, that just sort of point to this whole practice not being right. And I relate it to my earlier career before I got into solar. So of those people who go knocking on the door and they get people to sign contracts, 70% of those end up getting canceled, 70%. And I apply that back when I was selling athletic shoes and shirts. If you had a 70% return rate, you'd be out of business. It would be terrible. And, at least in those, the people have tried your product, but 70% of the people are canceling their contracts and they've never even tried solar. And then usually they cancel for reasons you're talking about. They wait forever to get the system. They get frustrated, they cancel. And then the propensity of that person to think about going solar again, the research shows it's 5 years before they'll ever consider solar again because they've been spoiled on the concept by this terrible sales experience.
Yeah, it's terrible. Yep. So we got to get those people to do it right. Do it right for people. Yep.
Exactly. That's sort of our motto, is doing things the right way around here.
Yeah, and I've heard other people over the years talk sort of about if you look at how roofing is done, it's usually by local companies rather than big national organizations. And for some reason, that's just natural. They know the environment, they know the inspectors, they know what's going on there on a smaller scale. And perhaps it's naturally going to turn out that way for solar. So
I think it is, Sean. I don't think that solar is naturally a national business. And I think a lot of things that are attached to our home, whether it's roofing, like you mentioned, I think it applies to plumbing, I think it applies to electricians. People would prefer to have people from their community working on their homes. It's a massive investment for most people. And if you're going to be ripping out toilets or punching holes in the roof or whatever you're doing, ideally you've got someone from your community. So that's been one of the founding principles of Sagebrush, is that we're part of the community. We have no aspirations to ever become a big national company. And again, nor do I think solar should be a national company.
Great. So if people want to have you install solar for their house in Massachusetts, where should they call? Just kidding. So
we do have a related company that does solar financing that is more of a natural platform, which I think is fine. Financial products, I think, lend themselves to being more national. But yeah, solar installation, I think, is a local community activity.
great. Well, it seems like we did cover a lot, especially towards the end here. Some really good stuff. Let's see. Anything else that we should cover?
Only, Sean, if you did want to cover this financial aspect, it's sort of an interesting offshoot where we've set up a lease company, again, to address these consumer.
Let's do it.
So one of the things as I got into solar that really frustrated me was I was looking for financial institutions to provide either loans or leases to my customers. And unfortunately, like on the solar sales side, there's a lot of shady stuff that happens on the financing side. And I frankly didn't want to work with a lot of those companies. And after having a lot of sort of doors slammed on our face by traditional financial institutions and having others that frankly we didn't want to work with, we ended up setting up a financial company that now does offer solar leases to not only our customers, but customers of other solar installers around the country. And the whole idea was to make it a great experience for consumers, no tricks, no lack of transparency. You know, a lot of these solar lease contracts have these escalators that every year your rate goes up. And unfortunately, what happens, you get people who get upside down on their solar. They end up paying more for solar than they would have paid to the utility. So we've done things like guarantee right in black and white. You'll never pay more than you would have paid the utility. So if for whatever reason, you know, utility rates go down, you're protected. Just a lot of protections we put into this and just did it absolutely based on the consumer. Again, philosophically very similar to what we do on the solar installs, just really focused on consumers, not ripping them off, being very transparent, not being predatory. So again, in our own small way, trying to address, I think, some of the things that unfortunately give the residential solar industry a bit of a taint.
So right now I'm looking at the LinkedIn page and it says Sagebrush Financial, a nationwide provider of ethical residential solar and storage leases to the country's leading local installers. So anybody doing residential anywhere in the country can give you a call and
Absolutely.
great.
Yeah, depending upon if we're in the state or not, it may take us some time to get set up, but we want to work with high quality installers who are doing right by consumers. We designed this lease product for exactly the kind of installers we are. In fact, we designed it for ourselves initially, and then we were so proud of it, we started to offer it outside of Sagebrush. But yeah, any installers who are interested in providing really high quality, ethical solar lease and PPA products to your consumers, by all means, reach out.
So what about all those unethical installers? Who should they do their financing through? Is it like the Mafia, Bank of America?
I mean, unfortunately, Sean, there are people in the solar finance industry who are well suited for those folks. And those are the ones we didn't want to work with. I just didn't want to give financial products to my customers that I didn't think were right for them. So that's why it was never my intention to, for all intents and purposes, start a bank when I started the solar company, but we ended up doing it out of necessity.
Okay. Well, I am looking really forward to getting to Reno. And is there snow on the hills right now? Do you expect it to be there when we're there?
There are. If you look west, if you look up at Mount Rose, which is our highest peak, it's all covered in snow right now. I hope we get more by the time we're supposed to get some more on Friday. Ski resorts are all open. So yeah, I mean, it's beautiful. When looking west from downtown Reno, the Sierras are all covered and they look beautiful right now. And I trust they will when, you know, in a few weeks at NABCEP.
Yeah, that would be kind of fun for people to go skiing before or after the conference.
Yeah, so Mount Rose, literally from the GSR where the conference is being held, you can see Mount Rose Ski Resort. So it's really, really close if people are skiers and they want to get up there. It's a real easy day trip, you know, before or after the conference.
So when I show up to the hotel, should I ask them for a Mount Rose view?
Definitely. Yeah, by all means, you want to be west facing when you check in.
West facing Mount Rose. I got to remember that. Don't tell anybody. I don't want everybody else taking my room. And then I'm looking at the skyline of Reno. There's some big circle thing there, like a big sphere. What is
Yeah,
that?
that's part of one of the casinos down there. And again, I already admitted my lack of casino knowledge, so I can't tell you which one it is, but it's a prominent part of the skyline, and that's sort of in the casino district down there.
All right, pretty cool. So let's see. Anything else?
That's it, Sean. It's been a great chatting with you.
Yeah, it's been super great chatting with you. And thanks, Eric Haskell, for being on Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage podcast. Eric Haskell is the founder and CEO at Sagebrush Energy and Sagebrush Financial. So go get yourself some renewable sagebrush, people, and make sure to see me at the NABCEP Conference. Give me a high five and a fist bump, and Eric and everybody else. It's going to be a great time, and I'll see you tomorrow.
See you soon, Sean. Looking forward to it.
All right, thanks. Take care.